For decades, fans believed Abba was the perfect pop dream: four smiling faces, glittering costumes, and timeless hits that defined an era. But behind the bright lights and sold-out stadiums, there was another story, one the cameras never captured. A story of passion that turned to betrayal, of secrets buried for decades, and of heartbreak so deep it nearly tore the world's biggest band apart. At the center of it all stood Benny Andersson and Anni-Frid Lyngstad. Frida. On stage, they were part of a global phenomenon. Offstage, their lives spiraled into a storm of love, jealousy, and devastating loss. While the world danced to Dancing Queen, Benny was wrestling with choices that would destroy the very foundation of Abba. And Frida, born as a war child, rejected by her homeland, carried wounds that fame could never heal. For years, fans speculated about the truth. Why did Abba really split when their success was at its peak? What drove Benny into the arms of someone new? And how did Frida, who once lived in the shadows of shame, transform into royalty, only to face an unthinkable tragedy? This isn't just the story of a band. It's the untold saga of love lost, secrets revealed, and a comeback that defied all odds. Because the same music that made them legends was born out of heartbreak that never truly faded. To the outside world, Benny Andersson and Anni-Frid Lyngstad were the picture of harmony. The cameras loved them. He, the quiet musical genius with a knack for melodies that stuck in your head. She, the striking singer whose voice carried both strength and vulnerability. Together they looked like a couple carved straight out of a fairy tale, their relationship unfolding right alongside Abba's meteoric rise. Fans didn't just adore their music, they believed in the love stories behind it. Benny and Frida weren't the only romance in Abba. Björn and Agnetha, the band's other half, were constantly spotlighted as pop's golden couple. But what set Benny and Frida apart was the sense of mystery that followed them. They weren't always on magazine covers or flaunting their relationship publicly, which only made their connection seem deeper, more authentic. To fans, this privacy suggested strength, as though they were guarding something precious. Behind the scenes, though, life was far from picture perfect. Abba's growing fame meant endless touring, countless interviews, and a schedule that left little room for personal space. The very songs that made them household names came at a price. Long hours in the studio, nights away from home, and constant pressure to keep delivering hits. Still, the public image remained flawless. When they stepped on stage, their smiles looked effortless, their chemistry undeniable. It was this illusion of perfection that made the truth so shocking when it finally surfaced. Fans who had grown up idolizing their bond would later discover that cracks had been forming all along. Small tensions, creative differences, and the suffocating weight of fame were slowly eating away at the love story the world thought would last forever. And while nobody could see it at the time, Benny and Frida's seemingly unbreakable bond was already beginning to unravel. Long before Abba conquered the world, Benny Andersson and Anni-Frid Lyngstad's paths crossed in a way that felt almost destined. It was 1969, and Sweden's music scene was buzzing with new talent. Frida was already carving her name into the folk scene with a fiery stage presence and a voice that could move an audience to silence. Benny by then had achieved fame with his band the Hepstars, often called Sweden's answer to the Beatles. He was a star in his own right, but something shifted the moment he saw her. It happened at a music festival. Frida walked onto the stage, her red hair catching the spotlight, her voice cutting through the noise like it was made for something bigger. Benny later admitted there was an energy about her that he couldn't ignore. She wasn't just talented. She had a raw independence, a force that stood apart from anyone he had ever worked with before. The spark was instant. Their connection wasn't just romantic, it was creative. Together they found common ground in their shared obsession with music. Nights spent in dim rehearsal rooms turned into something more. Two dreamers, sketching out a vision of a future that neither of them could fully see yet, but both knew was possible. By the early 1970s, as Abba began to take shape, their bond only deepened. Frida brought emotion into every lyric she sang, while Benny, with his perfectionist's ear, crafted melodies that could last forever. It was this fusion of precision and passion that became the heartbeat of Abba's sound. For fans, the story seemed magical. Two people falling in love as their band rose to fame. To outsiders, it felt like something out of a movie. Boy meets girl, boy forms a band, girl joins, and together they help change music history. But just beneath the fairy tale beginning, the very differences that made them magnetic would also plant the seeds of future conflict. And when success came faster and louder than anyone could have predicted, those seeds began to grow. By the mid-1970s, Abba was no longer just a Swedish pop group. They were a global phenomenon. Waterloo had launched them onto the world stage, and from there the hits seemed unstoppable. Sold-out tours, chart-topping singles, television specials. Everywhere they went, the world wanted a piece of Abba. But behind the glitter and applause, the very success they had dreamed of was beginning to drive Benny and Frida apart. Benny thrived in the studio. He was a perfectionist, spending endless hours fine-tuning every harmony, every chord progression. For him, music was about detail, about control. Frida, however, approached her art with pure emotion. She sang from the heart, spontaneous and instinctive, often clashing with Benny's need for precision. At first, this contrast was the magic that made their work so powerful. But as the demands of fame grew heavier, their creative differences turned into points of tension. The pressure of constant touring didn't help. Jet lag, interviews, rehearsals, and the relentless cycle of being Abba left little room for the quiet intimacy they once shared. Benny preferred the solitude of a piano, while Frida enjoyed the social world that came with stardom, the parties, the mingling, the chance to escape the pressure through laughter and conversation. What once felt like balance between them slowly became a widening gap. Friends and bandmates began to notice. During world tours, moments of tension slipped through the cracks. A missed glance, a sharp word during rehearsals, or simply the silence that stretched longer than it used to. Their creative spark, the force that had helped define Abba's sound, was dimming. By 1979, the cracks were impossible to ignore. Their love story, once woven into the very music fans adored, was unraveling behind the curtain. And it wasn't just the music industry that was watching closely. Rumors began to swirl, whispers of Benny's late nights in the studio, and a growing closeness to someone outside the band. For the public, the illusion was still intact, but for Benny and Frida, the breaking point was already on the horizon. By the dawn of the 1980s, Benny and Frida's relationship was hanging by a thread. What had once been late-night sessions, filled with creativity and laughter, had turned into long silences and separate lives. Benny buried himself in the studio, often staying until dawn, while Frida found herself increasingly isolated. And then, the rumors began to solidify into something much harder to ignore. During an Abba television special, Benny met Mona Nurklit, a warm, engaging TV worker whose quiet presence drew him in. At first, it was just whispers, industry chatter, about Benny spending more time away from home. But by early 1981, the truth could no longer be hidden. Benny came home one night and admitted to Frida that he had developed feelings for Mona. For Frida, the confession was devastating. It wasn't just the loss of a partner, it was the betrayal of nearly a decade spent building a life, both personally and musically. Still, with Abba's future at stake, they tried to keep things professional. On stage, the smiles remained, but behind closed doors, the weight of heartbreak was crushing. The cracks finally spilled into public view in May 1981. Inside a small office at Sweden's Expressen newspaper, Benny sat down for what would become one of the most difficult interviews of his life. His hands trembled, his voice faltered, and the man who had once dazzled millions now seemed small and uncertain. He admitted that his marriage with Frida was over. When the topic of Mona arose, he tried to brush it off with a laugh, calling her his new woman. But the pain behind his forced smile was undeniable. That interview shattered the illusion. Fans who had once idolized Benny and Frida's romance were now confronted with its painful end. For Frida, the betrayal wasn't something she could simply leave behind. The songs that followed, The Winner Takes It All, When All Is Said and Done, carried echoes of their heartbreak. Abba kept performing, but everyone close to them knew the magic was slipping away. The perfect couple was gone, and as their personal lives unraveled, so too did the band's unshakable unity. To truly understand Frida's heartbreak, you have to go back to where her story began. Long before Abba, long before the world knew her name, Anni-Frid Lyngstad was born in Norway in 1945, just months after World War II came to an end. But instead of being celebrated, her very birth carried a stigma that would haunt her childhood. Her father was a German soldier, stationed in Norway during the occupation. Her mother, a young Norwegian woman, had fallen in love with him. When the war ended, their romance turned into a curse. Women who had relationships with German soldiers were branded traitors, and their children, innocent but marked, were treated as outcasts. Frida was one of those children, a war baby. Her mother, desperate to protect her, left Norway with little more than hope. Together they crossed into Sweden, where she tried to rebuild a life. It wasn't easy. Money was scarce, and her mother worked long hours as a seamstress. But even in those difficult years, Frida found a lifeline in music. By the time she was 11, she was already singing at local events. Her voice was haunting, rich, powerful, and filled with emotion well beyond her age. Her grandmother, recognizing that gift, scraped together what little she had to buy Frida her first record player. Those vinyl records became her escape, each spin of the turntable transporting her away from the judgment and whispers that had defined her childhood. Music gave her something else too, belonging. On stage, no one questioned her past. No one cared about the circumstances of her birth. All that mattered was the voice that could captivate an entire room. But the shadows of her early life never fully disappeared. In the 1970s, after Abba had already taken the world by storm, Frida learned the truth her family had hidden for years. Her father was alive. A meeting was arranged in 1977, but instead of a joyful reunion, it felt like two strangers staring across an unbridgeable gap. The man she had imagined for decades was suddenly real, and yet painfully distant. That unresolved pain followed her, even as the spotlight grew brighter. To the world, she was Abba's glamorous singer, but privately, she was still the girl searching for a place to belong. When Abba disbanded in the early 1980s, Frida's life took a path that few could have imagined. After years in the spotlight, she seemed ready to retreat into a quieter existence, but fate had other plans. In 1992, Frida shocked the world when she married Prince Heinrich Rousseau-Rose von Plauen, a German nobleman. Almost overnight, the woman once branded an outsider in her own country became royalty. The fairy tale was intoxicating. Frida traded glittering stage outfits for gowns and tiaras, and her new home was a grand Swiss castle overlooking the serene beauty of Lake Geneva. The media couldn't get enough of the story, a pop icon turned princess, living in a palace with breathtaking views. It sounded like the perfect ending to a life marked by struggle and heartbreak. But behind the castle walls, the reality was far less glamorous. The free-spirited woman, who had electrified stages across the world, now found herself constrained by centuries-old traditions. Royal life came with rules, strict protocols, formal dinners, endless charity galas, and expectations that suffocated the independence she had always valued. For someone who had built her life around creativity and self-expression, the rigid structure of aristocracy felt like a cage. In interviews, Frida admitted that the adjustment was difficult. She was now surrounded by people who belonged to a world entirely different from the recording studios and concert arenas where she had thrived. The spotlight she once controlled as a performer was replaced by one she couldn't escape, one that demanded perfection, formality, and composure at all times. And yet, Frida tried. She embraced her new role with grace, presenting the image of a poised princess, while privately wondering if she had traded one kind of pressure for another. She had conquered the music world, but the royal crown came with its own heavy weight. For a while, it seemed as though she had found a new chapter of stability. But life had another devastating twist waiting for her, one that no title, no castle, and no crown could ever shield her from. For years, Frida tried to adapt to her royal life. The castle, the titles, the formal dinners, all of it became part of her new reality. But in 1998, everything she had built came crashing down in a way no one could have prepared her for. That year, tragedy struck when her daughter Anni-Frid was killed in a car accident in New York. She was only 30 years old. For Frida, it was more than a loss. It was the shattering of the one bond she cherished most. Anne wasn't just her child. She was her closest confidant, the person who had walked beside her through every transformation, from war child to pop star to princess. Losing her was like losing a part of herself. The grief was unbearable. The woman who once dazzled stadiums with her voice, who had worn crowns and lived in castles, withdrew into silence. Royal obligations suddenly felt meaningless. Glamour, wealth, fame, none of it could touch the emptiness that had hollowed her world. Friends recalled how she retreated into the solitude of her Swiss home, avoiding the spotlight that had once adored her. The free-spirited, fiery Frida seemed to vanish. For years, she lived quietly, grieving away from the public eye, clinging to whatever fragments of peace she could find. But in the midst of her darkest chapter, comfort arrived from an unexpected place: Benny Andersson. Despite the years of tension, Despite the betrayal that had torn them apart, Benny reached out. He knew the pressure of fame, the crushing weight of expectation, and the loneliness that came with it. For Frida, his support didn't erase the past, but it reminded her that some connections run deeper than heartbreak. Her story had come full circle, from a childhood scarred by rejection, to the dizzying heights of superstardom, to the pain of unimaginable loss. And though she largely faded from public life, her resilience became part of Abba's legacy, a reminder that behind the music, behind the perfection, there were real people with real scars. By the time the 1990s had passed, many believed Abba's story was finished. The band had split in 1982, their members scattered across different lives, their personal heartbreaks forever tied to the music they left behind. But in 2021, the unthinkable happened. After nearly 4 decades of silence, Abba re-emerged with their first studio album in 40 years, Voyage. The announcement shook the music world. Fans who had grown up with their records and those discovering them for the first time were suddenly united in anticipation. And when the album arrived, it felt like stepping back in time. The harmonies, the melodies, the unmistakable Abba sound. But it wasn't just nostalgia. There was a maturity in their voices, an echo of everything they had lived through: love, betrayal, tragedy, survival. Still, it wasn't the album alone that stunned the world. It was the concert experience that came with it. Abba Voyage, a revolutionary residency in London where digital avatars, puffbars, performed alongside a live band, created with cutting-edge motion capture and visual effects. The show took 7 years and nearly $175 million to perfect. The result? Abba, as they looked in their prime, brought to life in ways that blurred the line between past and present. Fans from more than 140 countries traveled to witness the spectacle. Over 1.3 million tickets were sold within the first year. For many, it wasn't just a concert, it was an emotional reunion with the music that had defined their youth. Some left in tears, overwhelmed by the feeling that Abba had somehow cheated time itself. And while the band has made it clear that they won't tour again in the traditional sense, their avatars continue to perform night after night, introducing their legacy to new generations. The comeback wasn't just about reliving the past, it was about rewriting the future of live music. From the heartbreak of broken marriages to the silence of decades apart, Abba proved that even the deepest scars can give way to something extraordinary. Their story wasn't over, it was only entering a new chapter. Abba's journey was never just about music. It was about love found and lost, about heartbreak that spilled into their songs, and about resilience that carried them through decades of silence to an unforgettable comeback. Benny and Frida's story reminds us that even legends are human, vulnerable, flawed, and shaped by pain as much as by success. And perhaps that's why Abba's music still resonates today. Because behind the glittering costumes and perfect harmonies lies something universal, the truth that joy and sorrow often walk hand in hand. So what do you think? Was Abba's heartbreak the very thing that made their music timeless? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more untold stories from behind the curtain of music history.